platform. This is
amazing. We lost Glynnis now?
I think we've lost Glynnis.
Oh, man.
Sorry. Is it possible to get Glynnis back?
I'm working on it.
Okay. So while T tries to locate some of our candidates,
you're live.
Let's just start talking.
Okay. What should we talk about, Mary?
Whatever you want to say. It's about your ward. It's about what you want to do, and it's about your mandate. So you have the platform. And John, we initially planned to give 2 minutes to everybody for introduction, but right now we'll just start with you, and we'll see if anybody joins. And if they don't, then it's their bad luck.
Yeah, I guess. All right. Yeah, sounds good to me. So yeah, as my name tag says there, my name is John Morgan. I've lived in Ward ipiihkoohkanipiaohtsi for the last 8 years now, and I've lived in the city of Edmonton for over 20 years. I serve currently on the front lines of Edmonton Transit for the last 14 years now, 11 of which have been with LRT operations. I started off as a bus driver, train driver, and moved into some supervisory roles there with LRT. I've been a community leader and volunteer, serving in the community league movement as president of the Heritage Point Community League, former president of Montrose Community League, civics director with Heritage Point, secretary of Johnny Bright School Council, Edmonton Federation of Community Leagues representative for our ward, and community soccer coach for a number of years prior to COVID. I'm the only candidate here. Well, obviously I'm the only candidate here, but I'm also believe I'm the only candidate that has frontline City of Edmonton operational knowledge and experience. So that 14 years working on the front lines of Edmonton Transit. Combine that with the charity work and volunteer work I've done in the community, gives me excellent knowledge of the community's needs and city operations. I come to you with concerns around keeping our services public, proper engagement with our communities, those we serve and those who serve us, tackling homelessness with meaningful and proactive action, and cutting down on the bureaucracy that I find stifles our connections between what's happening on the ground and the decisions that are being made. Hi, Glynnis. You made it.
So glad you're back on board, Glynnis.
Right on time.
Absolutely.
So we've kind of lost a little bit of time on trying to get the technical stuff up and running. So we will not waste any more time. So let's get Glynnis on the introduction.
Perfect. Thank you so much, and thanks for having me. As mentioned, my name is Glynnis Lieb, she, her pronouns, and I'm running to be your city councillor in Ward ipiihkoohkanipiaohtsi as well, because I believe that Edmontonians want and need action from a city council that's actually in touch with their needs and in touch with who lives in this city, everybody who lives in this city. I'm a social psychologist, I'm a social services worker, I'm a university instructor as well as a researcher. I've worked in the civil service, I've worked in not-for-profit. I've come from a family that was dependent on social services and municipal services to survive. And I know that there's nothing stopping this current city council from making bold, decisive decisions that are needed to minimize the adverse impacts of the events of the past year, the past couple of years, aside from a deeply ingrained resistance to actual bold action. One of the most frustrating things that I've experienced as a young adult, newly working in civil services, was the realization that there's an inherent eagerness to talk about things, to form committees, to have reports done, to conduct pilot projects, to contract consultants. But when it comes to actually implementing processes and procedures that look significantly different than what's already happened, that eagerness always stalls. And being a lifelong follower of politics, thanks to my father, who came to this country without the right to vote originally, but came from a place where the right to vote and participate in democracy was stifled. I've grown up believing in the importance of government and the fact that we as elected officials set the tone for the communities we serve. And I've become very frustrated in the last couple of years with watching people get elected, make promises, get elected, and then immediately start focusing on how to stay elected rather than keeping the promises that they made to the people who got them there. So my mandate, if elected to be city councillor in Edmonton, is to focus on doing that, keeping the promise that I have made to working people and their families, to regular Edmontonians whose voices need to be heard and haven't been heard enough previously. I want to focus on building community that is true to the term community and strengthen the communities that exist as we come out of this pandemic and move forward to the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Glynnis. That was a real nice snapshot. It looks like you've practiced your elevator pitch.
We've been on a few doors and a few meetings, hey, John?
So I'm sure that you're walking around in the community, getting familiarized with the people in your ward, and you're hearing a lot of things from them. So what are the kinds of things that people have been telling you when you've been knocking doors? And so first to Glynnis and then to John.
Sure. And I think, again, it's a sign of the times. And of course, this has been an interesting election because a lot of the time we haven't been able to physically meet people the way that we would have liked to. And I know, I announced very early, late last September, and John announced pretty early too. So we've had a lot of months to try to figure out how to find people, but we've also been finding people at a time of great isolation and, and disruption to life as they understood it. So interesting to me, we've heard the same things that polling has shown. We've heard lots about accessible transportation and the importance of quality public transportation. People are very concerned about how the city is going to recover from the pandemic, not only economically, but also socially and emotionally. And people are very focused on mental health and supports around mental wellness and that. And that was something that, coming from a mental health and addiction background, it was really interesting to me to hear. And I hadn't necessarily expected that I'd hear this many people talking so openly about their concerns and the caring about what the city is going to do to support themselves and neighbors when times are tough. So those have been some of the big things that I've heard. And I'll turn it over to John.
Yes, John.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. There's a lot of that that I'm hearing as well. I'm also hearing a lot of concerns around engagement. People just not feeling heard, not feeling like they're part of the process. I think it goes to some of those other pieces though too. When we're trying to implement stuff like new bus redesigns or even just fixing sidewalks and stuff like that. Just people they're not being listened to, not being heard, and so it's actually been really nice knocking on doors and hearing those concerns, because people feel like we're engaging them a little bit. So that's it's been a pleasure for me.
Thanks to both of you, for the points you raised. I'm sure that your ward has a lot of other things that you might have to work on when you get into office. But let's just focus on, especially the COVID situation that has isolated people so much. And we are all right in the midst of, and, we are still kind of working with it. So, Glynnis, do you have any plans in your mind about what you think you can do to help your citizens?
Absolutely. And I think, this is coming out of this pandemic, and we're not out of it yet. And this is where, one of my soapbox speeches always is about how government needs to think long-term, proactively. And this is a circumstance where that is really imperative. If we behave as a municipal government as if the pandemic is just about over and we need to, tighten our belts and move forward as fast as possible, thinking about, solely how to save nickels and dimes and move along, we are going to exacerbate the struggles that are coming. We know from disaster psychology and that big events like this take time to recover from, not only economically, but socially, emotionally, psychologically. And we also know that once the big part of the pandemic is over and we're starting to come down the downside, this is when we're going to see other struggles emerge. People who've been in survival mode, first responders, children and youth who have been drastically impacted by a year and a half of reduced socialization and things like that. We are in for some tough times in the next 2 to 5 years as we try to recover. We need to think that. We need to think 1 year ahead, 2 year ahead, 5 years ahead. We need to think economically. How do we keep people employed? How do we get people employed? How do we get them participating in communities? How do we strengthen communities and provide social infrastructure for people to reconnect, get the supports that they need within their communities? And how do we think long-term about providing supports to families who are going to need them? Again, economically, health-wise, mental health-wise, and let's plan for the long term. Let's not make rash decisions that put families in more peril right now as we try to recover coming from this.
Thanks, Glynnis. I'm going to hand over to John. What are the kind of things that you see in the quick impending future once you get elected into office? What are the kind of things you see as good practical solutions to the situation that we're in?
Well, I was just going to say, kind of on top of what Glynnis was saying about, is there's no recovery unless we deal with our homeless situation. Our homeless situation has exploded in this city, all across North America, really. But just the amount of trauma that I've seen as a transit worker over this last year and a half has been just unreal. And that's trauma to our homeless population, trauma to our front line, trauma to our communities. So we really need to think proactively about this problem as we go forward, and think about housing first solutions and safe consumption sites and transitional housing, because we're just in this endless cycle of pain and trauma and homelessness. So, and it's only getting worse. These big kind of world changing events like COVID really exacerbate the problems that we've neglected or not kind of dealt with properly in the past. So
Absolutely, John.
Yeah. Thanks for stressing on some of those important issues. In your ward, if you actually locate it, where exactly in Edmonton is it? This is so much for the audience so that we know who we're speaking to.
Do you want to take this, Glynnis? Or?
Sure, I can jump in. You can jump in too. So I'm all for informal jumping in. But so our ward has changed a whole lot from what people currently know to be Ward 10. Our northern boundary has backed up all the way to 34th Avenue. We start at Calgary Trail and move west from there. The west edge is a bit jagged. We have so through communities towards the west. But then we move all the way out to the south boundary of the city. And I think I can see John has some maps up behind him there. That too. But we're a lot shorter and a lot wider than we used to be on that. But we're still a huge chunk of us is what was previously Ward 10. Or I guess what it's currently Ward 10.
Are there any specific unique issues that your ward is struggling from that you don't see in other wards?
John, I can throw it to you and then I can jump in.
Yeah, no, for sure. So I think the big thing coming up in the next 10 years is going to be just development. We got probably a third of this ward is farmland, and how do we? I mean, the development's coming, probably whether we like it or not, and we're going to be needing services out there. We'll be needing to discuss and really prioritize food security as we push into farmland that's rich with good soil. So for me, that's what I'm thinking about a lot. I know that a lot of the I live south of the Henday, so I know a lot of the people that are in my neighborhood, in my neck of the woods, are really concerned about just getting out of the area when they are going to work or school or wherever they're going. So having the infrastructure in place, and like LRT and like roads, even just basic services too, fire, any of that stuff is going to be huge for a good chunk of this ward. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you're talking with people and folks in some of the newer areas like out around Chappelle and that are saying even if like, can you just put some park benches in our parks and some trash bins, like, that would help us socialize if we had places to sit, but again, the same, I echo that, the concern about infrastructure. And if we're talking about a city that's supposed to double in population over the next decade or couple of decades, we need to think about infrastructure and about development and about densification and how that looks, and how and John made a great point. We need to talk about long-term solutions to a lot of the issues and struggles that cause people strife. And so, what are the struggles that we're facing in the city that cause people to experience homelessness and food insecurity? And there we need to be creative. There we have lots of short-term band-aid solutions to lots of struggles, but not long-term. I love your suggestion. You're mentioning food security in that too, and the farmland, because I think there is some real opportunity to look at creative ways to advance food security in a climate-friendly way within our city too. There's a way, we need to look at climate responsible and densification of the city rather than spread, and the fact that when we add communities to the city, we need to ensure that we can afford to properly resource them and support them and give them the resources that they need to be able to get to thrive in the areas that they're in. John mentions that, Chappelle again, I'll talk about Chappelle again because there's, two ways in and out, right? And, so how do we get folks to the point where they're not, stuck in traffic, to get anything they need, right? So we need to talk about public transit and infrastructure and all those, and that's why I echo a lot of that. I could go on, but I'll stop here.
Yeah. So thank you so much for bringing those points up. And yeah, Chappelle and those areas which are brand new, they have just like two bottlenecks, from which people are kind of struggling to get out and in. So that is something that probably will have to be looked at. However, this new thing about the yes, John, you had a point.
Sorry,
right?
Mary. I just thought of something else I just wanted to say too. I guess going forward in some of this too, that in the north part of our ward, we have a lot of problems around just like we talk about transportation, south part of the ward, but on the north part of the ward, there's not a lot of thought that gets put into the various types of transportation. And I was walking through Sky Rattler once the other day and looking at the sidewalk situation, and they just lost their bus service as well. And with their sidewalks, they're just in terrible shape. And if you're, a senior or somebody that's having some challenges walking through to your bus, now that it's farther away to go to 23rd Ave or 111th Street, thinking about how we build our sidewalks and how we take care of our sidewalks for people that have to walk farther is something the city really needs to get better at. So, or like just thinking about the various ways of, accessibility. So if you're going to take away bus service, you better have good sidewalks, probably some bike lanes too. So.
Yes, for sure.
Absolutely.
I have also been thinking about, the new city trash bins that have been coming up, right? So in I don't know whether in your area the trash bins are still, have been deployed. I'm not sure about that. They have? Okay. So how do you see that moving forward? And do you see this, the recycling situation getting better? How do you see it? Because I don't see the landfill reducing or anything really happening. Is it something like that happening in your area? Like, do you see it? People are actually participating well, doing stuff?
I think, again, I think this has a whole lot of potential. I love the idea of actively promoting composting, and that's something that I think has been missing. I like the thought behind, encouraging recycling, reducing garbage. But, again, these things, this, like with so many things, a lot of the responsibility for improving our circumstance gets offloaded by governments onto citizens. And this idea that, if you do better, like if you, as a citizen do better at sorting your composting and recycling, we will do better by the climate. And I just, this service, services can work very well. This new service can work very well, but we have to look at how the city actually manages waste and what they're contracting out, who they're paying for what, and there's been a lot of controversy around waste and how it's been run within the city and that too. And then we have to look at, as a municipality, what are some choices that we're going to make to actually reduce our carbon footprint, reduce the impact we're causing on climate. So, I mean, because citizens in general do a really good job already of trying to reduce, reuse, and recycle. What are we going to do as a government to make this work?
Thank you so much, Glynnis. I feel the same because I remember when they gave us the 3 bins. I live in Meadows, so it's southeast. So they were like so critical about how we were putting the waste. They didn't even give us any training on how to use those bins. So I feel it's really important. I mean, there are so many people who are not internet savvy, like the older people and people who are actually doing the sorting and, like actually making this happen. You need to give them actual training. You need to probably call us all in the community leagues and, like at a common point in your ward and tell us what you're expecting us to do so that, it's not just all in the air.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And people respond. Again, we try to, if you want to change people's behavior, you create an environment that's conducive to the more desirable behavior. And this is part of it. But then again, it's the bigger responsibility, like I mentioned before. My education about these bins and that has come because I've been partnering with Waste Free Edmonton. That's why the only reason why I know anything, about what I'm supposed to do with these bins, to your point, right? And sorry, John, I'll let you jump in too.
No, I didn't want to interrupt there. No, I completely agree with all that stuff. But I think it also goes back to the engagement piece, right? And people just not knowing what's going on, whether that's because everybody's focused on COVID or not. But I just think the implementation of this new system, wow, it's a great new system. And there's got to be some understanding of kind of the waste we produce in our city and in our community. It's a lot easier to get people kind of on board with some of this stuff if you just tell them what's going on. So, which I don't know that we've done a very good job as a city.
Thank you for saying that. That's really important. And as we've seen that, the climate change is visible now in Edmonton, the temperatures have been skyrocketing, and I just can't believe the kind of temperatures we've had this season. So as we see this happening, we really need to take these things seriously. And how do you think education, like I know education is a provincial mandate, but I just really, really want you to, put some thought into how children are being engaged with all of these, like planting trees, for example, gardening, doing some kitchen gardens, and, making this something that children would enjoy doing through some kind of city activities for kids. Is there anything like that you have in mind for the children of your ward?
John, I can let you start because
yeah, no problem. I think we're underutilizing a really valuable resource in our city right now. I've come from the community league movement. I've been involved with community leagues for a number of years, and the communities know the people that they serve because they are the people they serve. And I think when we talk about delivering programs and services and rec, all that stuff on a tighter budget within the city, I think there's a lot of room to innovate and move forward with our community league movement. Empower the amount we can do with so little in the community leagues is unreal. I've seen it, and I've done it, and I think there's probably more to be. Well, I know there's more to be done. So
I'm super glad that you mentioned the community leagues, because I find it's an amazing network that's been underutilized in Edmonton.
Yes.
And we can do so much with it if the city really takes it seriously and gets them all engaged, and each community can be connected through that whole network that we have. And it's surprising that nobody really took it that seriously. And I hope that if you guys get a chance, either of you, you would actually take this seriously and try to use the community leagues to reach out to the people, to educate them, and to engage them, because many of them, as you said, don't feel engaged. We have some more time, and I'm going to focus a little bit on that engagement piece. What ideas do you have in mind to engage your constituents?
I can jump in here. I think, starting with the community leagues there, for one, I believe that community leagues play, like you said, play a very important role and that hasn't been recognized. And I don't think that council has been accessible enough to community leagues and allowed them easy enough access to have a say in things that are going on and decisions that are being made. I think we should be more transparent and more directly engaged with our community leagues as a council to expedite that flow of information and ideas back and forth, and to really have our finger on the pulse of what we can do in our community specifically to help achieve desired results, right? Because every community is a little bit different, and you might be tackling the same issue across communities, but depending on the makeup of one community, they might need slightly different answers than the next. And you don't know that unless you are working hand in hand with the people who are involved in that community, right? And I think that, that's something. I come out of the I worked in, like I said, public services and then not-for-profit. And that's, that is one of the cruxes, I think, is finding out who you have common goals and mandates with, finding them, creating those relationships and building the relationships and fostering them so you understand and have mutual respect, and that when the time comes that you need to work at challenging issues together, not just reaching out to when there's a problem, and that keeping those relationships going. I think we have to be more accountable. I think, as counselors, we need to be easily accessible by our constituents. And I know I've seen lots of politicians say that, but we actually do. There shouldn't be a, email here and wait 5 days for maybe a response from somebody. People should feel like they can walk down the street and connect with us and have their voices heard. And that's regular folks, not people who have, extra resources that gives them special entree, right? So I think that, just being accessible, and that starts, I know John's doing it too, that starts with building those relationships during your campaign so people actually feel that you're accessible. And John, I'll let you jump in.
Please go ahead, John.
Yeah, no, thanks, Glynnis. I agree again with all that. I think there's a problem with bureaucracy in our city too. And I think, we got managers managing managers in our city, and it's costing us big time in terms of just of knowing what's happening on the ground. Our council and our leadership is so far removed sometimes from the reality of what our front line is living, what our communities are living, what our homeless are living, that sometimes we forget what it's like down there, or just are blind to it. So I think when you're talking about engagement of citizens and what's happening out there, I think you really gotta look at that stuff so as well. And I know that the city's already kind of taken a look at or has taken a look at that bureaucracy piece and acknowledged some of that. I haven't seen a lot of movement on it though. And when we talk about redeploying 149 bus cleaners from the front line, we don't have the same conversation about redeploying management. So
we do not. And John, so again, I'm going to jump in on something that you said, because I think it's really important. And this is the thing that I think that we forget collectively. As elected officials, we are hired by and fired by regular people in the communities we represent. We report to them. This perception that being elected makes you special, inaccessible, above the people in the ward, that is not the case. You serve the people in your ward, and we need to remember that and go in with that mentality and maintain that mentality, and that to change the tone of how we relate to our voters, I think is very important, and all our voters, because they're, and that's the other thing, we've mentioned people who are unhoused and that people who are struggling. Every community member contributes and is equally valuable. When we're getting feedback and opinions, you shouldn't have to have 6 figures in your bank account for your opinion to matter and for you to have a voice in changes that are made.
Oh, I love what you just said, Glynnis. Thank you so much. I hope that all the candidates remember this when they get elected into office, because, the minute they get in, they have their suits and their boots, and then they are like different people. So we want that to stop, and we want you to remember that you are our representatives in office and you stand for us. So thank you so much for saying that. That was so important. There is a question here which speaks about privatizing of trash collections and sorting from the audience. Does anybody want to take that?
Are we going to give the same answer, John?
Yeah, you wanted to say it at the same time, or?
We can say it at the same time, right? Yeah, pretty much. Go ahead, John. Yeah.
No, I do not support privatization.
One of you has to take it. Please go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
No, I don't support privatization at all. I got real concerns about privatization in our city. I know our transit network is slowly moving that way. I know rec is going that way. Rochelle talks about trash collection there as well. We move to privatization. It doesn't just mean loss of union jobs. It also means loss of accountability, loss of ensuring that we have a fiscal responsibility over our services. Ensure we have control over our services. It may save us $1 here or there in the short term, but in the long term, it ends up costing us in quality, in control, and in ensuring that we have those services in place. So.
Absolutely. I think that, this is the thing that we have to memorize. And so I will echo what John has just said. I proudly come from organized labor. And I believe, and not only believe, I am also, as I said before, I'm a researcher. My decisions are based on what's shown there. Find me any research that shows definitively that that privatizing public services actually is beneficial in cost or in quality of service in the long term. You won't find it. It's all the research shows, all the quality research shows differently. And so when we're thinking about privatization in general, first of all, if you want good quality services, you need to employ people who live in the communities in livable wage jobs that support them and their families so they can participate in communities. The people who live there and participate are the ones who care about the communities and care about the quality of the work that they do. And so that helps the communities thrive on a multitude of levels. If we're contracting out to people who are for profit, who are then hiring people and trying to make a buck on the backs of underpaid, under-supported people, that weakens the underpaid folks' ability to properly engage in their communities and participate. And we know that working people put their money right back into their community, and that too. And it also erodes the quality of the services, and you end up then having to fix all the problems down the road, and that too. Privatization is never the answer, never the answer. We need to invest in quality public services and quality jobs that support families, especially coming out of this pandemic.
Thank you, Glynnis and John, for that. I'm going to address another issue of discrimination. Every ward has an issue of discrimination. Different kinds of people are discriminated against, and there are different layers of discrimination. So have you seen something like that in your ward, and how do you plan to tackle something like that?
You or me this time, John?
Okay, I just have a dog barking in the background. So yeah, in terms of discrimination, I mean, I've seen it. I've worked transit, as I said, for the last 14 years. I have a lot of concerns around, the attacks on Muslim women in our city, especially on our LRT system. It's been severely traumatic for them, and putting pepper spray in their hands to defend themselves is totally wrong-headed and just going to escalate the situation. So I think there's lots of things the city could be doing, including just outright banning hate symbols in public. We need to be a little bit more clear on our own messaging around that when we see this stuff, and I think there's probably some education campaigns as well we can be doing on transit specifically, but on all city property as well. So we need to step up our game, because people just don't feel safe right now, and based on this racialized violence. So thank you.
Yeah, I'll jump in there too.
Glynnis, I'm going to ask you one more element of that, and what I wanted you to address is, how are you going to make your ward more inclusive so that all types of people can be included and feel belonged, to your community?
Absolutely. And so, and thank you for the question. And again, it's another important one. And I'm going to come back to something that I've said before, in that government set the tone. Our systems set the tone. And we've talked a lot about inequities, discrimination, racism, and so forth in the last 18 months, especially in this city. And for governments to point to communities or community members again is covering up the real problem. We exist in a city, in a province, in a country where the systems, including government, were built to prioritize certain folks over others. And we still exist in those systems. And so if I'm going to look at how to improve the experiences of people in my ward who don't fit the demographic that our systems and structures were set up to benefit, I have to look internally. And we, as a municipal government, as elected officials, have to look internally at how our system works, how it favors certain folks over others, how it's more accessible to certain, the messages that it sends. For instance, the social incidences that we highlight, how we highlight them, the ones that we don't highlight, and why, and the messaging that we give to communities. We set the tone, and we have seen this since 2016 in the US, in other countries around the world with the rise of populism. Here at home in Alberta, we have seen how a government's attitude towards its citizen and various groups within, or what it's willing to overlook, sets the tone for social interactions in communities. We need to do better. John has pointed out specific acts, right? These things happen because these people believe that they live in a place where they are justified in behaving that way towards other members of their community. And they believe that because governments at all levels have not done a good enough job in this province at saying that this is unacceptable. We also haven't done a good enough job of having representation in actual decision-making positions beyond business, right? So we need to make the change.
Thank you so much, Glynnis. You touched on all those points. I personally was involved in some of the anti-racism work with the city of Edmonton, and I'm very much aware about racism right within the ranks within the city. So, a lot of articles were written about the harassment within the city. I hope that when the new council is elected in, there will be actual practical changes on the ground, and people will not feel that, just because the color of their skin is different, or because they are older than a certain age, or because they have some kind of disability, they are treated differently. And they're not given positions that they are eligible for. So this is something that I really look forward to seeing when, the new council is elected, because we have hope, and our hope is in all of you guys who are standing up for the elections, that we really want to, believe that you will make those changes happen on the ground. Now you have a few minutes.
Sorry, could I cut in there, Mary, for a minute?
Yeah, I just want you to quickly wrap up. Now we have about 10 minutes to kind of just state all the points that, I haven't actually given you a chance to cover. So please just, give your final whatever piece.
Okay.
John, please go ahead.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to give a last little thought on that too. I've real concerns about how sometimes we, just like Glynnis said, right? It's like all levels of government need to be moving forward with some of this work on anti-racism and anti-discrimination. I think I've seen a lot of stuff while working in the city that has given me pause when I look at some of the actions currently in our current council as well. So I think you need leaders that are willing to, just like city employees, go through the process of this anti-bullying stuff and anti-harassment and learning and acknowledging maybe their roles in that process as well. So and be open to being wrong. So. And like Rochelle says, sensitivity training needs to be mandatory.
Yes.
Absolutely. So.
Is there any other points that you think we haven't covered from all the things that you want and you're aspiring to do for your ward?
Well, again, I don't think there's any recovery without addressing homelessness. Addressing homelessness is going to have to be number one for us. If you go downtown, it's exploded, and we haven't been compassionate enough and humane enough in that approach. We've been, policing poverty for God knows how long, and it needs to stop. Needs to stop for the for the trauma that our police are facing, for the trauma that our homeless are facing, how the trauma our frontline are facing. So we need to. It's costing us big, and we need to address it. So
there's a very interesting question by Rochelle. How are you going to deal with nickel? Well, I don't want you to take that because that is not what the purpose of our show is. I want you to just. I want to give a chance to Glynnis to just tackle any of the points that we haven't so far addressed that you want to.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and I think and again, I think we've touched on a lot of important points, and there's a lot more we can say. I think that I feel like we have a moment here. We have a moment in history where instead of just talking about changing things, I think we actually can do it, and I think there's an appetite to do it. I don't think I'm the only person who's so frustrated with how hesitant, how status quo, that kind of the same way of addressing problems is repeated over and over at all levels of government. And no matter what we talk about, we keep coming back to the same solutions. And that's because we've been run by the same people, you see this. Look at the demographics of the candidates in this city election compared to the current city council and to any past election. We have a huge proportion of people who identify as, non-cis male. We have a huge people who identify as, as non-white. We have people, from, the queer community, from, people who are new to the country. We have all these folks who are standing up and saying, it is time for us to have our say. We need to have our say. We need a government that actually understands who the heck is in this city and represents it. And we need to think differently about how we address problems. This stepping into the tired old austerity measures to come out of this pandemic is not what we need. This lip service that has been paid for so long to addressing people that we consider the quote unquote the less fortunate, which is as soon as somebody says that, you're going to hear the same tired and true kind of stuff that's never worked before. John's mentioned people who are unhoused. You know what? We're at the end of a 10-year plan to end homelessness, right? Wow. Which everybody knew was never going to go anywhere because it was no different than any other conversation that had happened anywhere, I'm a social psychologist. I've been studying and working in this for 20 years, since birth. I've lived in 3 provinces. These are the same conversations. But the thing is, we know the pillars of addressing housing issues and housing insecurity. We also know that if we actually want, to prevent people from experiencing things like homelessness, like active addiction, things, we have to, what we do is we start providing services to families when they're young. We start ensuring that we're licensing quality childcare facilities that provide good, reliable service. We start thinking outside the 9-to-5 box for supporting workers and their families. We provide access to services for people and normalize access to wellness services for families before there are crises. And then when we want to address the folks who have experienced these struggles, we engage them in it. We need to be talking to people who are unhoused about what they need. They'll tell us,
exactly.
And that it's not the role of us experts to tell people what they need. It's the role of those of us who have the tools to do what we're being told to do to make it happen. And so we have to come out of this pandemic being cognizant of what people need to recover themselves economically, to recover health-wise, to recover socially. We have to provide those services for people. And instead of waiting and responding when the problems start popping up 6 months down the road, 2 months down the road, or 2 years down the road, and so forth. So we need to be active. We need to think about also the changes that are happening again around, jobs, around technology, around artificial intelligence. We need to embrace changes that are happening, and that by that I mean supporting our working families to ensure that that they have the tools that they need to stay actively employed, invested, involved in their communities. We need to be working with our communities. And I know we're running out of time. There's so many things that we could talk about here too, but I think, we just need somebody, we need to represent regular people and all the people working in our communities. And that, like I said before, CEOs are important, developers are important, so are the workers, so are the people who are volunteered, so are our elders, our knowledge keepers in our communities, so are our children. And I want to touch on that. We need to include our youth in everything that we do. That's what, and John touched on that before. And I think the youth have stepped up socially in a big way over the last year and a half or 2 years. And we need to be cognizant of all our community members, including our youth, and empower them. Thank you.
I'm really looking forward to both of you, if you get elected into council, to be actually the people who listen to your constituents and who actually, work with them to give them what they're looking for. Thank you so much, both of you, for your time today, because you both were the only serious candidates in your ward. I'm not sure, whether the rest of them were knocking doors and they decided that was more important. But I'm so glad that you came out and wanted to share your views with the community so that they could listen to you and they could hear you. Thank you so much for doing that today.
Thank you for doing this. This is thank you for taking this seriously. And and I know we're supposed to be like, kind of throwing shots at each other. But anytime I get to spend with John, I enjoy. So and that's a pleasure.
So there is one more question that has come up here. Sarah asks, "Do you live in this ward? What changes do you wish to see in our community?"
And so go ahead, John.
Yeah, I live in the ward. I live in Rutherford, actually, just south of the Henday. So I think, as I kind of noted earlier, we need to really think about, how our transportation works in our area, and how they work together. So roads, bike lanes, sidewalks, transit. When you take away one, you really need to be thinking about either boosting or making sure other parts are accessible as well. So I don't think we've done a very good job of that in the city, especially with this bus network redesign. So I'd like to see that, and especially in the south of the Henday. So although, again, the north of the Henday was the same thing. I noted Sky Rattler just lost their bus service, with people having to work or walk farther that are, getting older, and also lower income that rely on that bus network. So I'd like to see that for sure. So
okay, now I think we have approximately 2 minutes to get off the show. So I'm going to ask you, what do you think about this new naming of putting Aboriginal names to all the wards? What do you think of that? What is your thought?
I love it. And to Sarah, when I first came to Edmonton, I Bears Paws where I started out, and now I'm just off the north side of the ward in Duggan area. But I love that. I love that we are talking about having these conversations that involve embracing aspects of Indigenous cultures. Again, their ward names are good. They're a good start. They get people talking. They have people outside of their comfort zone. This is not even coming close to legitimately respecting and engaging Indigenous peoples in the decision that our cities make. And one of my campaign promises is that every decision that I make on council will be through the lens of reconciliation and engaging Indigenous peoples in those decisions. And I've started that by working under the advisement of a knowledge keeper, and that for my campaign and engaging Indigenous peoples in my team coming through. We need to do better.
Oh, there is a last minute question which asks about improving social services and collaboration and defunding the police. Does anybody want to take that?
Oh, yeah. Do you have another 3 hours? John, do you want to go first, or do you want me to?
Sure. No, I think our police are being misused incredibly with our response to homelessness, especially, and I think it's causing trauma to our homelessness. I think it's our homeless and houseless communities. I think it's causing trauma to our police, to be quite honest with you. And I think it makes them the bad guys when you send them in at 3 a.m. to go and remove homeless people from a LRT station in minus 30-degree weather. But if you have no other services that are more appropriate, then this is what happens, right? So I think we need to be boosting our social support network for sure. I think we need to be including groups like Bear Clan and Water Warriors in that response, and let police stop policing poverty and police the actual criminal element that we're all concerned about too. You know, I hear a lot about crimes of opportunity in the middle of the night around here and no police around. I've talked to police officers myself that have said they're 3 days behind in response to anything. So how do you get them to those things that actually matter when they're, again, out policing poverty?
Thanks, John. I think we have exhausted our time. Thank you so much for sharing that, because that's a really compassionate thing to say. And I hope you will stick to that once you get into council as well. Thank you so much to both of you. You've been such amazing candidates, and I hope that, you have a chance in this election. All the best to both of you. Like, you are really hot people, and I hope, we get some people like that in our council. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Glynnis.
Appreciate it. Take care. Bye.